Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Where Does It Come From podcast. I have with me a very special guest today, Rahul Noble Singh, who I'm talking to from India. He's in India. So he's going to tell us all about his work and what inspires him. And I know you'll absolutely love to hear what he's got to say. So hello and welcome, Rahul.
Hello, Joe.
It's lovely to have you on the Where Does It Come From podcast. So, first of all, do you want to introduce yourself, tell us about yourself and your background, and what's brought you into where you are now?
So my name is Rahul, as you have just pointed out. Um, I am based in Delhi, in India. I have kind of all my life moved back and forth between India and the UK. I grew up between the mountains in the Himalayas in a place called Manali, and for half the year where my parents were running a trekking business, and then half the year I was in London going to school. Um, my mother's family are from the west coast of Scotland, so I've also spent quite a lot of time there. And I've kind of all my life I've kind of made that journey back and forth between the two countries and places. I've been in India for the last 16 years. Um, and yeah, that's me. I work for an organization called the Centre for Pastoralism, which is probably one of the reasons why you've asked me to come on and do a podcast with you. We've, of course, worked together on projects that the Centre for Pastoralism have been doing. Um, I suppose there's two or three hats that I have on that may or may not have prompted you to ask me to do this. But one is my work with the Centre for Pastoralism, which is there are 10 to 12 million pastoralists in India. Pastoralism is the mobile herding of animals. And there are various different definitions, but that's the kind of definition that we use. And we work across advocacy, research, policy, um, and livelihoods. My work has been largely focused on the livelihoods work and more specifically around wool and trying to promote Indian wool. I also work with an organization called Miyar Mufflers, which is a small community-based enterprise in the Miyar Valley in Lahore, where we work with around 40 women who are knitters, who knit scarves, mufflers, blankets, and they use wool from their own sheep, which they keep. And then I also, for a number of years, have worked for an organization called Rangsutra Crafts India, for whom I'm a director in the company. And Rangsutra is a community-owned company that works with artisans, largely in Rajasthan, and we link highly skilled, small-scale artisan groups to large retail markets. So, for example, Fab India in India and IKEA globally, who would never be able to get a small handmade cushion cover made in a rural village in Rajasthan. And likewise, communities in rural villages in Rajasthan would never be able to get their products into, an IKEA store in Tokyo or London. So we kind of help bridge that gap. So
That's really
yeah,
interesting. And I think you talked very calmly about your upbringing, but I think a lot of people will be quite inspired by that because that's a really interesting upbringing in terms of living half your life here, half your life in India. And you must have seen and experienced and been part of different cultures just growing up without even probably realizing that you adapted between those things. So maybe that's, I'm just wondering, because you wear so many hats as well. You work for 3 different organizations and probably do other things as well. Do you think that that's made you a bit sort of able to adapt in different environments and to take on different things at the same time.
Yeah, maybe. That's very possible. I mean, certainly the work in Himachal is where I grew up. In Manali, I actually spent a lot of time with my mother. Wrote a book called Over the High Passes, which was a year she spent traveling with the Gadi shepherds, who are pastoralist shepherds in Himachal. And I also spent quite a lot of time with them growing up, more, playing cards and cricket rather than kind of understanding or studying kind of sheep or wool or what they were doing. But I suppose my love and interest in the mountains and the communities there has influenced, the work that I've done there. Rangsutra, for me, in a way, was a kind of dream, or a dream opportunity, and I think a wonderful model that combines a kind of a philosophy of a social enterprise or collective, but uses a corporate vehicle in terms of a public limited company to do it, so that it's a for-profit organization, but the owners, the shareholders of the business, are over 2,000 artisans themselves. And I suppose I studied anthropology at university, which resulted in I think almost instant unemployment. I then thought I wanted to train and work as a tennis coach, and teach Italian princesses tennis. I never made it to Italy, but ended up working in restaurants and washing dishes and cooking, and then waitering and managing restaurants in London. I then decided I wanted to get a skill that I could use. So I trained quite late as an accountant, and when I had finished my training in London, I then came to India and wanted to see. It'd been quite a long time since I'd been here, and I wanted to kind of reconnect with my roots a bit and see what I could find here. So I don't know, probably, yeah, a mixture of maybe traveling around and different types of kind of work experience means that I probably have got quite a varied. I'm involved in kind of in many. I don't know if I'm involved in different things, but there is a kind of mixture to the work that I do.
Oh yeah, I think you're very unusual like that. Although if I'm wrong about that, maybe people can let us know if there's other people like that. But I think for me, I worked with you for the last, I think, 3 years now, haven't we? Worked together on the Centre for Pastoralism work, and it is, for me, it's quite inspiring that you go into each culture so seamlessly because of your upbringing. It interests me that what children absorb when they're growing up. It's very interesting. Anyway, you talked a lot about your love of the mountains, so I think we should talk a little bit about the Centre for Pastoralism, especially as this year is, I think, the UN Year of the Pastoralist, if I remember correctly.
It's correct. It's the UN Year of, I have to get this right, rangelands and pastoralism, or pastoralism and rangelands.
I thought I wasn't quite right there, but yeah, rangelands and pastoralism, and that's global. So there's lots of activities and things going on across the world. The Centre for Pastoralism, as you say, is based in India and supports pastoralists, herders, which tend to be sheep and goats, I think, don't they? Mainly going through the mountains.
Yes, but there are a lot of there are camels, yaks, buffaloes, a large number of ducks.
Oh wow!
So mobile herding of ducks. So there are a lot of, not just certainly maybe in the mountains in the Himalayas, it's mainly sheep and goats.
Yeah.
But across the country, there's a lot of different animals.
I never heard about ducks before, so yeah, that's something new I've picked up from you today. So the project that we've been working on for the last few years, supported by the British Council and UALFTTI, is looking into the traceability of wool, because there's a big problem we all know about wool globally. Sheep farmers, wool producers are not being paid fairly, and then we have the bigger problem of synthetics coming in, and being there's bias in favor of synthetic textiles in many large organizations, which means that they're seen as better. But anyway, that's another story for another podcast. But do you want to talk a little bit about the reason that we started up the project of trying to put traceability and other parameters into the Indian wool?
Yeah, so it was so within the Centre for Pastoralism, we created an entity called Desiun, which means local or indigenous wool, and it actually started with a focus and emphasis on more crafts and textiles. We have around 25 different partners across India who all work with wool and are involved with kind of artisanal or craft textile products. And SU became a platform for these different, mainly small, but some large, some small, varying degrees of scale of organizations to come together and kind of sell and market themselves under a kind of single brand name. I mean, they're all individually, many of them well-known brands in their own rights, but the Desyun kind of connected them all in the sense that their work and working with wool was something that kind of united them and built a kind of community and a sense of common mission and vision to some extent. I mean, they all have their own independent visions and missions, but there was something in that community of the group that was very powerful and was successful in terms of promoting Indian wool and promoting the organizations individually, and they all helped each other to kind of do that. And the traceability project with the British Council was very much, the idea. It was kind of, we were doing it anyway, but without a kind of rigor in a way. But the importance of where the product comes from, the wool, the sheep, the pastoralists. I mean, all of our work is really about trying to preserve. Maybe preserve is the wrong word, but to enable pastoralist communities to continue their way of work. We're doing with wool is a way that trying to increase the demand and the value of wool so that there is an incentive or an increasing incentive for pastoralism to continue. It's not necessarily that it's wool that we're most interested in, although we are. It's a means to an end. And in that sense, the work on traceability is very important because it's not just the quantitative aspects of traceability in terms of kind of product and specifications and micron count of wool, but it's also about the storytelling and the people and the places and the provenance and where things comes from. So and of course that's where where does it come from, in terms of where does it come from, along with the Centre for Pastoralism and supported by the British Council. We kind of worked to try and create more of a systematic way in which we could track and that supply chain, and both as I said, the kind of the storytelling aspects as well as the kind of the technical aspects of wool.
But there was also I remember back to the beginning of the project, which is about 2 or 3 years ago now. The numbers were quite shocking, I thought, in terms of the amount of wool that was being wasted from the mountain wool, the indigenous wool, as opposed to what was actually being imported from elsewhere. And I know that it's more nuanced than that, but they're big numbers, aren't they?
Correct. So yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, India has the second largest wool, not wool, sheep population in the world. 75 million sheep.
Wow.
Um, and I mean, it's a bit disputed is not the right word, but it's hard to know exactly. But you know, it's probably around 50% of that is not used, and or the price that shepherds get for it is almost negligible. It could be zero, it could be 5 rupees or 10 rupees, and then we go and import 80% of the wool that actually is used in India is imported wool. So things like the Indian carpet industry is well famous for woven wool carpets. Um, but something like 70 or 80% of the woolen Indian carpets which are exported don't use Indian wool. So it's a kind of absurd situation in some senses where there is such a large quantity of wool available, but yet we go and import so much wool to fulfill the demand that does exist.
Mm. Mm.
But you're right, it is a little bit more nuanced than that, in that India has, 90% of the wool in India is coarse or carpet grade, and 10% is apparel grade. And most of the wool that India imports is the finer merino wool from Australia and New Zealand, which we do have less of. And it's the bulk of the wool is this kind of coarser wool that exists here, which is why just to as I said, the work with the SUN and the Centre for Pastoralism started with crafts and textiles and groups that were involved on more artisanal products, but we realized that wasn't really going to shift the needle or make enough of an impact in terms of wool across the country. And we then started to look at more industrial applications in terms of thermal insulation, acoustic insulation, packaging. And the work on traceability, again, has been really critical for the industrial applications as well, because increasingly industry and business wants to know where things are from, how they were made. So it's not just a storytelling exercise for a kind of a consumer brand, but big industrial companies place great emphasis on knowing and having a very transparent supply chain and understanding every aspect of that supply chain. So
and regulation is coming in that will make that more and more stringent as time goes by as well.
correct, yeah, absolutely.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? And I think that the shift of the needle, as you say, towards so that you're widening the funnel, I suppose, for the types of product that can be made with the wool. And it makes sense that it's coarse because it's come from sheep that have been living on mountain ranges, so it's not surprising that the breeds are hardy. But the looking at the different applications for that wool is very good, interesting. Yeah, I was going to say. So
actually, the other way around, Joe.
No.
The 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 mountain wool is the soft one. So the
Really?
hardy, where it's very cold and extreme in terms of temperature, the wool is often much finer. So I mean, in the extreme case, the pashmina goat wool,
Oh
the
yeah.
dark, is the finest of all, and it's the temperatures there are the coldest. So it's actually more in the heat and the plains and in the desert regions where the wool is less.
I'd always assumed it was that. See, I've learned two things. I've learned about herding ducks and that the wool is the wrong way round. I'm the wrong way round in the wool. Yeah, and that when you say it about pashmina, it makes total sense, of course. But yeah, no, that's interesting. But I was just thinking about, you said earlier about your work with Rangsutra Crafts being about providing that bridge between I guess the communities on the ground who are actually doing the work and creating crafts and doing things, and the bigger industrial organizations, industrial is not the right word, mainstream, I suppose, organizations like IKEA, who are able to then access those beautiful handmade crafts, and the people can access those larger orders and larger markets. And it's the same in a way with this, isn't it, that you're helping the pastoralists, who are sheep and goat and duck herders, to access markets for their product, which and to provide that bridge in between, where you capture the information that the people buying it require, and are able to support the livelihoods and collect information from the people at the start. So it's kind of a bridge, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. One second, Joe. I'll just.
Sorry.
Moment. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely correct. And in both instances, both with Rangsutra and the Center for Pastoralism, it is about acting as a bridge and connecting people and their produce and the materials to the markets. And actually, in both cases, you know, the challenges that are being faced today come from quite a similar root cause, in that for both crafts, whether it's, you know, hand embroidery or handloom weaving or wool as a raw material, you know, for many, many years and generations, you know, from 30, 40 years back, you know, hundreds and hundreds of years, there's always been a local demand. And the craft was consumed locally and used for everything, for clothing, for decorative purposes. And wool, again, was also used for ropes, for blankets, for tents, for shoes, for you know, just, you know, such a huge variety of applications. And as, you know, cheaper synthetic produce has come in, that local market has kind of diminished. And although there's a global demand for both the craft and the wool, the supply chain and the means of accessing those products hasn't quite developed. And in that way, both Rangsutra and the Center for Pastoralism is kind of acting as that bridge to connect, to create different types and manage different types of supply chains and connect them to markets and demand. So yeah, I mean, that is.
I remember you telling me a very interesting story about when you were working with Rangsutra. I mean, actually, do you want to talk a little bit about more about how Rangsutra came about? Because it's very inspiring. And then the story that you told us about IKEA in the COVID period. That's a really interesting story too.
Yeah, so I mean, Rangsutra was started by a woman called Shumita Ghosh. She had been working in Rajasthan with largely farming communities, and there had been a terrible drought. And she and others had thought, how do we, you know, what can we do to try and create some other means of livelihoods for the farmers. And one of the skills that a lot of the farmers had, that they were also weavers, and a lot of the women were very highly skilled in terms of embroidery. So the idea was to create a company that would help try and market and sell you know, their products and crafts to markets. So they started Rangsutra, and they had a problem in that they went to banks, and no one would lend them any money because they didn't have any assets, they didn't have a track record. It was hard to get investment because it was a completely new company, and again, they had very little assets or track record or experience of running companies. And in the end, Shumita went to 1,000 artisans that that she had worked with, and everyone put in 1,000 rupees, and that was the first 10 lakhs of which is about £10,000 of share capital, and that's how the company started. So in a way, it actually wasn't by design, this idea of you know, community ownership and artisan ownership. It came out of necessity, and it seemed a very natural thing for Shumita to do. To turn to kind of support and to invest was, the people that she had the closest relationship with, and the people who were going to, hopefully benefit and profit. So they then became the owners in Rangsutra. And once that was there, banks were able to lend, and other investors came on board. Fab India invested early on. There was a social impact investor called Avishkar invested. I think I'm not wrong in saying that Rangsutra provided one of, if not the first, exit and returns to a social impact investor in India, with something like a 30-40% kind of return, year-on-year return on investment. So that's how the model started. And it worked very well. And the sense of ownership at other times when there were, difficulties or issues that happened, having the owners of the company also the beneficiaries in terms of work, meant there was a real, if anything we did as a management wrong, there was power in artisans' kind of voices to be able to call us out or to question us, because they were ultimately the owners of the company. But then there was also, shared responsibility in trying to fix things and make things work. And just, on a personal note, for me, that was what I, thought, and had often thought, but it had occurred to me that why is it only that companies are able to invest in resources, assets, whether it's a human resource or a physical resource, or, why can a village or a town not invest in their own land, in their own natural environment, in their own skills? But they can't. A village, there's no vehicle that allows a village to invest in a sand dune or a mine or a water body or their own human resources. But companies can. Companies can buy and rent and own these assets, but communities can't. So for me, this model, not just in crafts, but I think it's something that can be applicable in many different sectors, whether it's tourism or mining or, literally anything, farming, as a model in which there can be entrepreneurial drive and business mindedness, but those profits and when you're exploiting an asset, the return and the benefit of exploiting that asset remains within the community, rather than kind of the profits extracted to shareholders who kind of sit maybe thousands of miles away.
Well, exactly. And I think also you find then that the people who are living and working in that community understand the issues. And it's very similar to the many discussions on privatization and things like that we have in the UK. So the people who are experiencing, I don't know, say the health service, for example, and working in it and everything, have far more of an understanding of how it should work and how to benefit the patients, say, than the people who are just trying to make money out of it. So if you just make everything about making money, then you don't actually understand the basics of what's happening and who's actually benefiting, or the environment, being exploited. So yeah, definitely that it makes a total amount of sense, doesn't it, to do it that way?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
So
then you were asking about COVID and
yeah.
IKEA, and it's kind of related in a way to some degree, in that we had been supplying to IKEA, I think, for about 4 or 5 years before COVID, and when COVID happened, I mean, we were lucky in some ways because our model was not, you know, kind of large production factory based. We were, um, you know, it was very much kind of work from home was our model. That we, the women worked in their own homes or villages or small scale kind of community centers where they got together to work. Um, but still, COVID was had a huge impact, and at one point we had to stop production, and we had to stop. We weren't able to get the product out, um, and like so many, everything just kind of ground to a halt. And IKEA came to us and said that what are you doing about are you paying the artisans each month? And we said that we can't. We haven't got we're not being able to execute the orders. We're not being able to send the orders out. We're not being paid for the orders. And the model of that we work with is that the artisans are paid on a per piece basis. And therefore, if they're not working, we can't they haven't made that piece, and therefore we can't pay them for that piece, and we don't have the money to do it. And IKEA was like, no, you have to pay them. You can't you can't not pay them. And we said, well, again, we just said we don't have the money, and that's not our model. Sorry, I got a call coming in. You're going to have to do some editing skills.
Do that, don't
So, but again, they kind of kept saying the same thing. You have to pay them, and in the end, they said, they effectively said to us, listen, we'll work out how much they would have earned during this period. How many pieces would they have made? How much income would they have got for this? During the period where they haven't been able to work, and IKEA effectively reimbursed us for to pay everyone for work that that they hadn't done but they would have done. And their logic was that if we're going to come through COVID stronger, we are dependent on all of our suppliers. We value that relationship, and for IKEA to be strong, our suppliers have to be strong, and therefore there was no question that they felt the need to support wherever they could their suppliers, so that when they came through COVID, their supply chain and their business was in a strong position. And I remember them saying something like, IKEA has done really, really well, year on year over the last however many years, but the years that it has done best and outperformed everyone else has always been in some form of crisis or another. So they have this kind of inbuilt feeling that whenever something actually is going wrong globally or in some way, that's when they are able to, they have a confidence that that's when they step up and they do well. So it was great. I mean, so many other companies were using COVID as an excuse to cancel orders and to get out of contracts, and IKEA absolutely did the opposite. They kind of stepped forward and kind of leaned into it and said, well, we're going to support you. And we're not just doing it for an altruistic point of view. I'm sure there was an element of that, but they were also doing it because they felt it was good business sense for themselves.
It's very wise, and it does make you respect them a lot as a business, doesn't it? You sort of think, well, they've got that long-term thinking rather than just making a quick buck when I can make it, making a profit when I can make it. So it does impress me. As you say, I mean, it's funny to look back now, sort of, was it 6 years ago now? It's the way that some of the organizations and businesses, especially in textiles, just cancelled orders or didn't pay for orders that had already been delivered because they knew they couldn't sell them. So there was some real abuse happening at that time as well. So it's great to hear a positive story about that. But it also shows the bridge that you had built, not you personally, but the organization had built with IKEA, because that bridge between the artisan and the large company was there, that you were having those conversations. They could understand what the problems were, and support that, because they wanted that bridge to continue to be able to run their business the way that they did. And that's a model that we want to want to encourage to continue, because that's so important. And hats off to IKEA and Rangsutra for making that happen, really.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It's
Mm.
correct. I mean, because of that, these were not faceless products. There was a connect between IKEA, Rangsutra, and the artisans, and there was a relationship that kind of went the whole way along. And that was important to IKEA, it was important to Rangsutra, and it was important to the artisans. And that I'm sure you're absolutely right. That is, I'm sure, partly what contributed to that, to that support.
And that's kind of where we want to be going with the wool as well, really, and so many other different projects that you and I are involved with, is those kind of traceability, the storytelling, the authenticity, and that bridge, so that the people who are, I don't know, purchasing or from large organizations, or even the end consumer, understand the impacts of every decision on the people who are making it and the environment, but also that long-term business model, that if you don't support it, you have to keep that consistency going, or the model will disappear.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what I mean, traceability and the work that we've done with we've done together and with the British Council is it's about connecting products to people and places, and through building those connects, you do get, like was demonstrated with IKEA, the relationships and connections develop, and it creates a very different type of engagement, a different type of connect between customers and the product, and the people behind it and the places behind it. And I think there's less exploitation and probably more mutual valuing and supporting and understanding, when that is there.
Yeah,
Sure,
no,
there is a
agreed.
possibility that it's been used for, marketing. It's a marketing tool, and you can, but I think where it's done well, and it often is important where it's done well, and it really does create those meaningful connections.
Mm. I do honestly think that most people are fairly understanding and decent when they understand the people issues. So I'm thinking back to a few years ago when I was working with a large organization to supply an order of handcrafted scarves that were dyed to their company colors, and they had their logo on and all of that, but they were delayed because there were very bad rains in the part of India that was making them, and so they were delayed. And this customer I was working with was getting in trouble with her bosses, and in the end, her boss sent me an email saying, if they don't arrive by this date, then we are not paying for them at all. If they don't get here by this date, we're not paying for them. That's it. And I was quite upset at the time, felt quite stressed about it. And I'm sending an email back saying, well, if you don't pay for them, that means that all of the raw material can't be paid for, the people can't be paid, all of these kind of things. And they didn't follow up on it at all. So I think it was just understanding, using that kind of threat. It's, to me, it's outdated, but I know people still do it. But you have to understand the impacts of what not paying for something means on the communities that are actually making it. It's just it's a bizarre thing. I mean, that's my next question really, was, do you think that the world is changing? I mean, I know you and I are work in an area that's maybe a little bit more social enterprisey, but do you think the world is changing in terms of how heritage ways of life and production are valued? And do you think things are getting better? Please make me feel hopeful.
I'm not sure. I think in some ways, definitely, I think there is an increasing importance and value placed on where things are from, how they're made, what went into them being produced, the places, the people. And I think, that was there a long time ago, and we moved away from that. But I think there is a return to being curious and interested in and valuing that. But I don't know whether, with things becoming increasingly mechanized, with AI, with just with the scale and the volume of business and the concentration of kind of money and capital, I don't know. It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell what's going to happen. But there is definitely. I mean, there is. We've been working with organizations like TACO, which is a Tata auto component company that supplies car components to Tata Motors and many other companies, with organizations like Enfield and Aisha, trucks, with building architects and builders. And there is clearly an interest in wool and more sustainable and natural materials and fibers. And that's one of the things that I mean, we talked about the import of wool, but one of the things I didn't mention, that actually the real competitor is kind of plastics and synthetics, and that there are so many products that materials like wool. I mean, there are many other materials that it's not just wool, but that could substitute and replace plastic and synthetics. And often there's an argument that it's more expensive, and the plastic and this is cheaper, but a lot of the the externalities and the costs, the negative costs of using and making and disposing of plastics are not taken into account when companies make those decisions. And I think, you mentioned regulation. There is an increasing awareness of, if you build a building, you don't just look at the cost of building the building, but you need to look at the cost of, the disposal and what happens at the end when the building is knocked down. In the same way, when you buy a washing machine or a car, it's not just the cost of the production. There's a cost associated with the end of life of these products. And I think government is also realizing that. And for example, the EU has banned plastics being used for packaging material, which is why we've been working with TACO and Tata Motors to make a product that can go as a packaging material that meets those European Union kind of guidelines. So yeah, what did you ask me, whether I was hopeful? I mean, I think I am, and I am seeing definite change, but there's also things are changing so fast, and AI and the concentration of wealth is increasing in the hands of fewer and fewer people.
Yeah,
So
the capitalist system is a challenge, and I think every podcast I do that seems to come up in terms of the system that we're working within, and just trying to do our best within a system that is weighted in a certain ways, making capital, making large volumes, not considering end of life. But I remain hopeful, because you have to. But like you say about regulation, is now pushing organizations, probably slightly more enlightened organizations, to consider and follow up with things like wool as a packaging material. So that's a real positive, because if you think about the amount of packaging, for example, in companies like Amazon, if they moved over to wool, that would make an enormous change. And on a smaller scale, I was thinking when you were talking, people who've listened to the podcast before know that I'm involved in a project called Sanja Stories, where we've looked at to try and make the most community focused, circular, biodegradable, whatever, the best pair of jeans that we can. And you're actually one of our ambassadors, our first run of customers for that. And we have set up with that what we call a digital product passport, which is a regulatory requirement through the EU to have a digital product passport. And that's the kind of thing as well that builds those connections. So I think more and more companies are going to be coming to expect when they source product from somewhere, that there can be some kind of digital product passport, so that their end customer can see exactly where what they bought has come from. So for example, your auto parts, maybe, and I don't know if this is the case, but maybe in the future even the packaging will have to be detailed, what's in it, for the customers. And having wool rather than synthetics is going to be better.
Yeah.
So there is definite hope, and I think especially with the regulation, going in the direction. It is slow because regulation is, but there are not small, there are significant changes which you don't realize how significant they are. But like you say about the packaging, that could have an absolutely massive impact.
Absolutely. And it's happening already that, when they are working out the costing of products, they do look at, obviously fuel and transport, but also the material that is used to package a product when it's being transported, and the costs of that packaging material, and the negative externalities that are associated with the use of those packaging materials. All of those costs are increasing, come into a kind of accounting framework or kind of costing framework that whether it's government or industry will do look at.
Yeah.
So that will happen.
No, it's really important. I mean, I know I've told you this before, but I was at a really interesting presentation from a lady who was talking about the life cycle assessment rules for synthetics and natural fibres. And this is the EU, and it was currently, well, they're looking to change it. They're being treated completely differently. So synthetics their life cycle analysis is only measured from the point of creation to the end of use, whereas with natural fibres, it was far earlier in production and far later in the life cycle that they were being considered. So when you're not comparing like for like at all, and then they come out and they say, well, actually synthetics are more environmentally friendly, which anyone with any sense will know is complete nonsense. But that's wise, because they're not being measured like for like. As soon as you start looking at the fact that synthetics are made from oil, fossil fuels, and they won't decompose at the end of life, it's a no-brainer, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Anyway, we'll agree on that one, so there's no point in discussing it. Well, I think we ended up with quite a positive outlook, positive-ish outlook. The last question really is are there ways that things that you think people who are listening to this can do to help move things forward for wool, for your work, for crafts, and what would you suggest that people do to make things that bit better?
I think to be curious about where what you wear comes from, where what you buy comes from. I think we've seen that hugely in terms of food. People are much more conscious about the food they eat and what goes into their bodies, and maybe because it's something which you're consuming and therefore there's a kind of more of a personal interest. But I think it's starting to happen for other products also. So I think being curious and asking questions about the things that we buy, where they're made and who made them and where they come from, and in process kind of valuing the knowledge and the skills that the communities that shape and create these products bring. And I think just in a way going back to pastoralism, we're not necessarily doing it because pastoralists are a kind of poor, marginalized community that need saving. They're actually they have something like 44 billion US dollars worth of assets. They create 14 billion dollars worth of revenue each year as a contribution to the Indian economy. They account for 3% of agricultural GDP. They manage over 30% of all livestock in India. They're responsible for 44% of different breeds and biodiversity in the country. So they play an incredibly important role and contribution to the Indian and in many ways therefore global economy, but certainly in India. So I think that's also when we look at cost and we look at value when deciding what we do and what we buy and what we're interested in. I think having being connected to where things come from and how they're made will also result in therefore understanding often the value that's kind of not direct, but I mean, it is direct also, that it's kind of connected to those places and those people. And if that is lost, we're losing a lot more than just a kind of, a kind of a culture or a community that's is kind of preserved in an anthropological museum. It's really not, that isn't what it's about. It's there's a lot. I think recently I remember was reading something in Japan where they had planted two types of trees extensively, and replaced a lot of other trees. And for some reason, I can't remember why they thought these two trees would be, maybe they grew faster or there would be something good about them, but it's caused a massive disaster in terms of biodiversity, and in terms of allergies. I think they found that people have now much more allergic to things, and it's because of this focus on just two tree varieties. So the kind of knock-on impact of, I don't know if this has slightly gone off topic on your question, but there are often wider implications in terms of decisions we make about either what we buy or what we plant or what we invest in or what we grow, and sometimes just purely based on a price comparison or an efficiency. There's a risk of losing something that you can't get back, and can have a ripple effect in terms of negative impacts.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thought, actually, because it's just making me think that, I think we have to be a little bit more humble perhaps than we are when we're buying things. And I think we sometimes arrogantly think that we know, or we don't even, it's not even that, it's that arrogance is the wrong word. We don't think at all. So when you buy something, you think maybe about the price or the color, or will it fit in my house, or you think in a small way about that item. And nobody should buy something that isn't right for them. The best thing is to not buy anything at all, really, in terms of a different problem of overproduction. But if you're buying something, you need to think about more than just yourself and what you need. It's got to be about, that could be feeding someone. That if you're buying the synthetic thing rather than the wool thing, what is the impact of that on a bigger system? And I don't want to make everyone stressed out or anything, but sometimes it's quite easy to not think about those kind of impacts. You have to think about whether it's better for the world, better for the person at the end of the chain. It's just a little bit more thought, doing what is the better thing rather than doing the easier thing.
Yeah, I think that's right. But it's like we were just in Zimbabwe together, Joe, and I remember one of the big topics, and we spent a week with young designers who were sourcing different materials, and we'd gone to study or look at these cotton growers and ginners and cotton factories. And a lot of the designers were using, and not just the designers, but the kind of the wider population were buying very cheap kind of imported kind of almost reject garments and fabrics that had been dumped in Africa by countries that had produced excess and didn't know what to do with it. And they were kind of effectively, large ship and container loads are taken and dumped. If you're an individual, you of course you will buy something that is, it's cheap, it's a designer product, it's probably well made, and if it's at the fraction of the cost of something that is, handmade or naturally made, or it's difficult to ask the consumer to change their decision making, and to some extent we do need to be responsible. I think that's where government also and maybe people, and we need to kind of lobby and express our views of what governments can do, because I think it's very difficult for individuals to make individual decisions that sometimes might be counter, disadvantaging themselves. in terms of cost or in terms of choice. But there should be certain policies or regulatory frameworks in place that are kind of the ones who are maybe who are doing that rather than individuals. So I think it's both.
Probably both. Yeah, but it's interesting when you say that, because I remember the discussion we had about the dumping of the second-hand stuff, and a lot of the young designers were quite angry about it, weren't they? That all this stuff was being dumped in Zimbabwe's markets in a
Yeah,
way.
because it kills all the local product. It kills
Exactly, ruining all the local
the local
production.
production.
But they then, I think they then went away from that session saying they were going to lobby. They were going to start contacting and trying to get the government to think about it, because, you know, if the government doesn't know, any government doesn't know what people want, they can't change it. I'm not saying they will, but they can't change something if they don't know it's a problem for people, I guess.
Yeah.
Or probably at the end of that. Anyway, that was I didn't even talk about our recent trip to Zimbabwe, but if anyone wants to know about it, Am and I talked about it on our podcast. But yeah, that was a wonderful experience. I don't want to speak too much longer because we've taken quite a long time, but I hope everyone's enjoyed listening to Rahul. And how can people get in touch with you if they want to, Rahul? Or do you have a website that people can go to?
We do. We have the Center for Pastoralism .org. We have a website. Desiyun is on Instagram, and we have a website. So yeah, either the websites for Center for Pastoralism or Desiyun, and we're also we're on Instagram as well.
Wonderful. That's great. Well, I hope people are inspired to get in touch and find out more about the work that you've been doing. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you yet again, and we'll carry on our projects working together. And yeah, I'll see you soon. So thank you so much for being part of the Where Does It Come From podcast.
Thank you, Joe. It's been it's been a pleasure and good fun talking to you as always also.
Good.